2018 was a mixed bag for anime. A year filled with some new compelling series, accompanied by some horrendous adaptations along with your typical cookie-cutter isekai shows. Yet nothing sent the anime community into a frenzy like Darling in the Franxx. It's hard to believe that it's already been 5 years since this show aired. Even to this day, there are quite a few people that believe the first 18 episodes of Darling are a borderline masterpiece, which I'll just say right now is a statement that I disagree with. Most people believe that episode 19 is responsible for the collapse, but I think those first 18 episodes have a much bigger role to play in its downfall. So, without further ado, let's get started. In case someone knows nothing about Darling or needs a refresher, Darling takes place in a dystopian post-apocalyptic future where adults live in underground cities, while children train to become soldiers and pilot giant mechs called Franxx, created and named after this guy, which are powered by guys who literally ride girls into battle to fight futuristic dinosaurs. You know, your average Trigger show. They all fight for a guy named Papa, who is akin to a god in this world, and his group of cronies called Ape. Although it was stated that there are 10 main characters who are all on the same squad, in reality, there are only 2 main characters at most, Hero and 02. And the primary goal of these first 6 episodes is to get them to pilot together without having any issues. The only problem is that no one has survived over 3 rides with 02 because she's part dinosaur. The dynamic between these two is the series' strongest asset, and even if I don't think the romance between them is great, their interactions keep people watching, even after things get a lot worse. Despite witnessing 02's very touchy-feely behavior with Hero, they haven't established a trusting relationship or a mutual understanding of one another. 02 needed someone to help her pilot, and Hero was practically a dead man because of his inability to ride a mech with anyone else. Basically, their relationship was born out of necessity. An issue I have with Hero's character from the start is that he struggles to be engaging on his own. His entire character revolves around his relationship with 02 and nothing else. This may not be a problem in a traditional romance series, but in a show where there's a lot more going on, it's a much bigger issue. The only things you know about him are his very high potential to be a powerful soldier, and that all the children he grew up with when he was younger loved him. Not much is learned about the other main characters of the show besides Trash, Ichigo, and Goro, who are Hero's closest friends. Ichigo is the leader of the squad and has a very obvious crush on Hero, which only leads to much bigger problems that I'll discuss later. But for now, I'll just say that prioritizing drama about a crush instead of developing the leader's skills to use her squad effectively probably isn't the best move. Goro has a crush on Ichigo and has known of her infatuation with Hero for a long time. He deeply cares for both of them and simply wants what's best for them. The rest of the cast, as of this moment, is broken down into simple archetypes. Zorome and Miku are loud and hot-headed. Ikuno is reserved, I guess. She really serves no purpose in the story other than eventually developing feelings for Ichigo. There's no detail in it at all, or any notion that the series will do something interesting with the two of them. It's just there. As for the rest of the characters, Mitsuru tries to act cool and collected, but it's clear he's putting on a front. Kokoro appears to be kind and soft-spoken, and Futoshi likes to eat food, and he's fat. It sounds insane that most of his character amounts to this, but it's true. Until he gets a whole 1-minute scene where he gets exposed by Zorome for forcing himself to vomit because of his insecurity about his weight. The writers spent more time on having Zorome roast Futoshi about his weight than they did on his sudden onset of an eating disorder, which was never brought up again afterwards. Now, despite the negativity I've shown, this is the best section of the entire series. It provides a lot of plot threads to explore for later, while also building an intriguing world to go along with it. The children are clearly being kept in the dark from all kinds of secrets. Papa and his goons are planning to do something big later on, and 02, along with the dinosaurs, are a mystery. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of Hero, 02 does most of the heavy lifting for their interactions with her mischievous personality. I think this portion of the story could have been reduced by 1 or even 2 episodes and still have accomplished the same things. Still, it's a good start that gets the job done, and the quality of animation is what you would expect from Trigger. This is where the series already begins to take a bit of a nosedive. Trigger put most of the progression of the plot and world building on hold for the sake of trying to develop other characters in the squad. Episode 7 starts out by completing the beach episode quota, but later everyone goes and explores an abandoned city. It's a nice detail for the children to go here, as it raises questions in all of their heads about the true nature of the world they live in. Episode 8's focus on the guys and girls being at odds with each other honestly almost feels like filler, until the squad discovers photos of the former group of children who were in their position. Despite this detail coming in the later portion of the episode, it doesn't really add much to any of the characters. The show has already put many of them in danger, and they are more than aware of the possibility that they may not be coming back the next time they pilot. Episodes 9, 10, and 11 primarily focus on one character and only that character, which is a very risky move. Because even if these episodes end up being amazing and the characterization is good, it takes away time for the plot and world to develop at a steady pace. On top of that, it would be a waste for these characters to receive that time in the spotlight and then become irrelevant later. What was the point of spending time on them if they didn't play any sort of significant role? It's not that these episodes are terrible, and as a matter of fact, I thought episode 9's focus on Goro was great. He's shown to be someone who genuinely cares for his friends, but is willing to put his feelings aside for the sake of his squad mates, and to not be a mental burden to the people he cares for. He confesses his feelings to Ichigo, knowing that she has feelings for someone else and is understanding of that. All he wanted to do was get it off his chest. He fits the title and role of leader much more than Ichigo does, and all it took was one episode. On the other hand, episode 11 has scenes like this.
Did you make Kokoro do that? Why didn't you dodge that punch? You're supposed to be a man! I loved her so much!
Drama isn't exactly the show's strong suit, but they try. They definitely do try. Yeah. All the drama does is cause more problems for the show to handle. The bottom line is that the risk of abandoning the advancement of the plot all for one character that may or may not be relevant later just doesn't seem worth it. Some stories decide to be more character focused or plot focused, and Darling decided that it wanted to have both, which can be very tough to balance out. Ultimately, the decision to halt the plot progression from this early on is what contributes to its collapse. Episode 12 finally gets the plot back on track and acts as a setup for episode 13. Throughout the previous section, 02 has slowly been morphing into a dinosaur, and she reveals that the more dinosaurs she kills, the closer she gets to becoming human, a lie that she's been convinced to believe. Her mind has gone feral, and she will do anything to be reunited with her darling from her past. Now, the revelation of Hiro and 02 being connected to one another wasn't exactly shocking, but it was without a doubt the most important and pivotal moment of the entire series. If they stuck the landing on this backstory, then the momentum for Darling moving forward was going to go through the roof. And that's exactly what Trigger did. Episode 13 is without a doubt the best episode of Darling in the Franxx, and it's not even close. It answers many questions regarding both Hiro and 02, all through a chance meeting and a simple fairy tale. It explains how Hiro forgot his promise to Mitsuru, why others found him to be so different compared to when he was younger, and it explains how he survived piloting with 02. Speaking of 02, through the Prince and the Beast fairy tale and a little help from Hiro, you learn why she knows about things like love and marriage. You learn why she has a tendency to make all her food sweet. And most important of all, you learn why she says, "Daddy." It's the subtle details that are woven into the narrative that make all the difference. I remember everyone was singing this episode's praises and theorizing the direction the story was going to take now that Hiro had remembered Ape's treatment of 02 and how they altered both of their memories. But I've got to say that I have never seen a show kill its momentum this fast. While I disagree that a singular episode was responsible for the entire collapse of Darling, episode 14 would be my pick if I had to choose one. Everything about this episode feels like the polar opposite of the last one. The pieces were finally coming together. Hiro and 02 finally recognize one another, and both of them are very aware of the brutal actions that Ape was willing to take to fulfill their goals. All they had to do was talk to each other, but all of that was put on hold because of one person, Ichigo. The plot of this episode, to put it simply, is to stop the advancement of the plot. Are you starting to see a pattern here? This is going to be the only episode that I spend time on summarizing because it's so ridiculous that it feels necessary. Ichigo separates Hiro from 02 to keep him safe and convinces the entire squad to help her keep the two apart. She accuses 02 of leading Hiro to his death by piloting with him, which, even though it's kind of true, considering that she tried to strangle him, doesn't even make any sense at this point. This was the major conflict of the first 6 episodes, and Zero Two's notorious reputation had already been dealt with. After Hiro eventually succeeded and came out alive, there was no problem. Case closed. Now suddenly it becomes problematic again? The rest of the squad helping Ichigo also annoys me, because it's not like these characters have formed a bond with Hiro and have gotten to know him. Towards the start of the show, everyone either pitied him, didn't care, or looked down at him. Things only turned around for him when he could pilot with Zero Two and become the squad's hard carry. They're all aware of the connection those two have, yet they decide the best thing to do is keep them apart. Zero Two was okay throughout the episode until she believes everyone tricked her into thinking that Hiro was still resting, when in reality Hiro had snuck off to go and try and talk to her. And as a result, she decided to beat everyone up, which leads to Hiro being disgusted with her and calling her a monster. All this drama feels so forced, unnatural, and most of all, unnecessary. There was such a clear direction for the series to go, yet they somehow did a complete 180. But hold on a second, because they saved the best part for last. At the end of the episode, Hiro wants to apologize to Zero Two, but Ichigo holds him back and begs him to stop. As tears form in Hiro's eyes, Ichigo takes a second and says, "You know what? Fuck it," and kisses Hiro not just once, but twice, and proceeds to confess her feelings. And guess who's there to witness everything? This entire time, Ichigo has not only made zero progress towards becoming a better leader, but has gone backwards after this episode. Also, both Hiro and Ichigo are terrible friends. They're so hung up on their crushes that they don't even remotely think about addressing each other's feelings. Goro was left on red, while Hiro is staring at Zero Two flying away as he's being confessed to. Even if I enjoy Ichigo being ignored, the guy is just being a dick. This episode was horrible from beginning to end, and somehow Trigger managed to somewhat salvage it. The one word I would use to describe episode 15 is bittersweet, because this episode is actually pretty solid, but the fact that it came after episode 14 makes it look like it was important. Does that mean the episode might be okay? No, not at all. If episode 14 never existed, then this would have taken its place instead, to an extent. Hiro and Zero Two would have had a cathartic heart-to-heart at the beginning, and their strength on the battlefield would have been just as impressive without the pointless drama. Regardless, Trigger made the most out of the previous episode and found a resolution that was surprisingly satisfying. Watching Ichigo enter Hiro's mind and seeing nothing but Zero Two will always put a smile on my face. And seeing Zero Two and Hiro confess their feelings for one another and absolutely obliterate the biggest threat they've ever seen got me genuinely hyped up. Episode 13 did so much for strengthening their dynamic that I didn't care if the first half of the show failed to do so. After watching this episode for the first time, I had false hope that things were back on track. Now, the ideal decision after episode 15 would be to stop watching the show. Sure, the series will feel incomplete, but at least you end off on a good note and finished a relatively flawed but enjoyable enough mecha series. Of course, hindsight is 20/20, and that would never happen. It's from this point on that the series diverts from its main idea, which is commenting on what it means to be human. However, after episode 15, the topic of reproduction takes the spotlight, and rather than being complementary to the idea of what makes someone human, it becomes the show's entire identity. I understand that this issue specifically relates back to Japan, and even the director himself, Atsushi Nishigori, all but confirms this. But the switch feels so abrupt, and it's more than likely not going to have the support it needs to stand on its own. It's not even worth trying to split up the final third of the show, since it's practically all downhill from here. Instead of addressing the world building or plot and trying to keep the momentum from episodes 13 and 15, the next 3 episodes decide to take a detour, where the anime suddenly becomes a slice of life with more focus on Mitsuru and Kokoro instead. Look, I'm all for slow episodes that let the characters take a breather, and at times, they're a necessity. Unfortunately, Darling does not have that luxury at this point. But they don't really care, because after having a grand total of 1 or 2 somewhat meaningful conversations throughout the whole show, and a haircut that is supposed to symbolize a significant change in both characters, these two have fallen in love with each other, end up having sex, and then getting married the next day. It legitimately sounds like a typical fanfiction story that you'd find on Wattpad or AO3. And in the end, none of the shallow development between them even matters because they end up getting their memories altered exactly like Hiro and Zero Two. Another thing that bothered me for the rest of the show was the change in Zero Two's personality. She's much more friendly with everyone in the squad now that she's worked things out with Hiro. Normally, seeing a change in a character is a good thing, but it feels like her entire personality has changed instead, not just her behavior with other people. It's not like her more mischievous side was all a front to hide her sadness or anything like that. That's just who she was. And taking that away from her as a trade-off for a stronger bond with Hiro makes no sense. And so we finally reach the notorious episode 19. From my perspective, this episode wasn't the beginning of the end. Rather, it was more like the final nail in the coffin. After the first 6 episodes, the world building and plot advancement came to a crawl, and that lack of development has finally come and put the writers in a corner, where they realize they don't have enough time to take care of everything and write a proper final act. Dr. Franxx, or Frank Werner, had the potential to be one of the most interesting characters in the show. Being the pioneer of the weapons and technology used in this world is a big deal. He could have been a character shrouded in mystery, with a couple of details spilled now and then. But when he suddenly pops up at the beginning of this episode, you've almost forgotten that he even exists because he's been that irrelevant. He spends most of the episode monologuing about his life and how humanity got to where it is now. Even before Ape showed up to give him everything he needed, he was not an ethical scientist by any means and was under heavy scrutiny for his behavior. Thinking about Dr. Franxx's character reminded me a lot of another mad scientist from another anime. On the surface, these characters appear to be very similar. Limitless curiosity accompanied by heinous acts in order to achieve results. But there's one thing that separates these characters which makes the gap in quality so massive. Demeanor. Dr. Franxx looks distant and bored most of the time he's on screen. He rarely shows any strong emotions even when it comes to his work. I mean, the guy barely even blinked when his fiancée died. Obviously, her only purpose in his backstory was to die, which gets him to fall down a darker path. Yet the writers couldn't even get that one completely right. It's only after he meets the dinosaur princess that he becomes obsessed and passionate about his work. As for Bondrewd, the guy doesn't even show his face and he's somehow infinitely more expressive. Whether it's through his voice, his gestures, or his actions, Bondrewd takes pride and care in all the work he does. And despite the horrifying acts he commits for the sake of the advancement of science, he remembers the name of every single person who contributed to his cause and cared for them up until the very end, in his own twisted way. It's that juxtaposition between his actions and his behavior that makes him such an interesting character. While most of the episode focuses on Dr. Franxx and his subpar backstory, the rest of it takes place back in the present, with everyone upset and distressed over Kokoro and Mitsuru's memory wipe. After 19 episodes, Hiro finally takes action for someone other than himself or 02 and goes straight to Papa, demanding the squad be relieved of duty. Even though I should be glad Hiro is taking action like this, it was one of the most frustrating parts of the entire show for me, because it should not have taken this long for Hiro to say something like this. This is why I said that episode 14 was so important. It had such a big role in setting the direction for the rest of the show. As soon as Hiro remembered what happened in the past, you think he would immediately talk to his squad mates about it. Just say something. Anything. The worst part is that Hiro confronts Dr. Franxx and tells him he'll never forgive him for what he did. Well, bozo, if that's how you felt, then why did you not say anything way earlier? Anyway, it makes sense why the staff decided to speedrun the rest of the world building in a measly 20 minutes. Even though the episode turned out to be a mess, I don't hate it or find it solely responsible for the show's collapse, because no matter how you look at the situation, they had no other choice. Regarding the rest of the show, aliens happen, 02 and Hiro go after them after she becomes a giant spaceship, then all the characters get together and send some good vibes their way to let them get the job done. These two have a kid, Goro hooks up with Ichigo, and Hiro and 02 reincarnate 1,000 years later because why not? And that's Darling in the Franxx. So after all that, there's one question that needs to be answered. How did this show become so popular in the first place? Currently on Mal, it's the 62nd most popular anime, which is really impressive considering that it wasn't based on any source material. I think initial interest comes down to two things: Trigger and mecha fans. Here's the perspective of your average mecha fan, who's receiving their next dose of dopamine after having watched Evangelion for the 30th time. They have resigned themselves to this fate as they believe nothing else could be superior and match their intellect. And Trigger is one of the few studios they can rely on possibly providing them with what they want. The hype of potentially getting anything that shares similarities with Evangelion or Gurren Lagann was too good to resist. But what kept everyone watching was very good waifu material. Zero Two had caught the eyes of many weebs around the world who didn't even care what the show was about. All they needed was a screen, some lotion, tissues, and an array of 6-digit numbers, and they were ready to go. If anime has taught us anything, it's that a good waifu may be all you need to make it big. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and leave a comment because I actually read those. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.